Okay, hello. Welcome to this webinar from the Collective Leadership Institute. Welcome everyone. The webinar today is about collaboration for sustainable development, multi-stakeholder partnership, anything that is related to sustainability and in particular to the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. I'm Elisabeth Kuehn. I'm one of the senior facilitators and project managers at the Collective Leadership Institute. And I'm sitting here in Potsdam in Germany together with my colleague Martin, who I will actually bring in really quickly so that he can introduce himself. Let's see if this is going to work. A second. Yeah, there's Martin.
Hi, hello. This is Martin speaking. Yeah, I'm here if there are any technical problems, or write it in the chat, and I hope I can answer these questions. I put some typical technical problems already in the chat, so feel free to fix that. And I will collect the questions during the training, and I hope we can answer them afterwards. So see you later.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Martin. So yes, with any technical questions, just please write it in the chat. I hope you can all hear and see me. And this also leads me directly to sort of give you a brief overview about how this webinar is going to go. I will give you a short input about our Dialogic Change Model, which is our methodology, a process methodology to sort of structure your processes of working with stakeholders, of working with different people for sustainable development, and in particular for contributing to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Now this input will be about 30-40 minutes. I will illustrate it with a lot of practical examples from its application, and then we will have a Q&A session where I'm happy to have all your questions and comments and insight, and hopefully can give you some feedback and some more information on that. And for that session, I will actually bring in Martin. He will help me to co-moderate that essentially. So while I'm doing the first part of the webinar, that you write in the chat, and then we will get back to them once we get to the Q&A session. Okay, then I will start. So first of all, let's see a really quick introduction about who we actually are. The Collective Leadership Institute is an independent, non-profit organization. We are here based in Potsdam in Germany and also in Cape Town in South Africa. And we were founded in 2005, so we've been around for a while already. And our vision is really, we like to say, we want to empower future-oriented people to lead collectively towards a sustainable future. So our vision is really to give our methodology and our knowledge and our support to anyone who engages in sustainable development and is behind that goal of sustainability globally. And we implement this vision by supporting anyone across any sector, no matter where you work, to collectively create and realize solutions for sustainability challenges. Now that's us, the CLI. And then we have the global sustainability challenges, which, as I'm sure you all know, the state of the world is quite dire. We have huge challenges regarding governance, social justice, migration crisis, climate change, in particular, such things as massive droughts and scarcity of water resources. So we have a diversity of really severe and pressing challenges. And the UN has actually developed the Global Sustainability Development Goals. There's 17 goals for achieving or addressing all this diversity of sustainability challenges that we have across a variety of sectors globally. Now, the SDGs, or Agenda 2030, as they're sometimes also known, they were originally developed as a follow-up to the Millennium Development Goals. But what is interesting with the SDGs, and why I'm also bringing them up, is for the first time, they're truly global goals. They're not development goals for any particular area in the world. Rather, these are issues and challenges that are the collective responsibility of all of us, no matter where we are in the world, no matter where we work, no matter what technical expertise we have, it's our responsibility to contribute to achieving these goals. Now, the Stockholm Resilience Center has published this interesting graphic, and they simply, let's say, assorted the SDGs in a different way, which shows how let's say that the variety of the SDGs, no matter in what sector they are, whether it's biospheres, society or economy, but how they're interrelated. So they're not achievable in isolation, but they are connected together. Hence, any solution that you create to address any of these SDGs also needs to take into account the variety of other SDGs that are around it. And what I want to highlight just with this graphic is not only how biosphere, society and economy interrelate, but also how it shows that collaboration, namely the partnership for the SDGs, the 17th development goal, that really is a transversal issue. It's something that connects all the SDGs. No matter what sector you're in or topic you're in, you can't get around collaboration. And it's this recognition really that's driving also a huge of CLI's engagement across the world, that you can't avoid collaboration, and collaboration is at the heart of all the SDGs and of all sustainability solutions that you want to achieve. So this is also reflected in the name that we gave ourselves, collective leadership. What is behind it is really that since collaboration is the key to any sustainability solution, what you need is collective leadership. And collective leadership means that a group of people really has the collective capacity to bring about the change and the collaboration that is necessary for sustainability. Because collaboration and sustainability, what is at the heart of it, is just people. When it comes down to it, even when you're addressing such hugely global challenges such as the SDGs, when you try to implement solutions, it comes down to people. Sustainability is the agency of a huge diversity of people everywhere in the world. And this is the core why we need collaboration, and essentially why we're here, because we recognize that collaboration is enormously important in order to bring about any sustainable solution. Now, before I'm presenting the Dialogic Change Model, which is our methodology to really improve collaboration and to structure it in a really impact-oriented way, I just want to give you a brief overview over the examples that I'm going to use to illustrate the methodology. I'm using 4 examples, 3 of which are from the MENA region, from Egypt, Tunisia, and Morocco, and one of them is from Côte d'Ivoire. Now, the first one from Egypt is a project where we supported the enhancement of the dual education system. So it was all about improving the quality of education in Egypt. Second project was in Tunisia, and this was about supporting sustainable water resource management. It was about establishing a water forum for integrated water resource management in a central region in the heartland of Tunisia. In Côte d'Ivoire, which is geographically the little outlier here, we have had a project, we supported a project that wanted to make the value chain of cocoa production entirely sustainable. And this is obviously an interesting project, since sustainable value chain development is a huge and complex undertaking, something that really needs to take into account collaboration from your cocoa farmer in Côte d'Ivoire all the way up to international chocolate industry and business on a global level. And finally, we have an example from Morocco, where we work together with people trying to improve the economic development, namely of 6 provinces who were not on the economically well-developed coast, but rather in the center of the country, where you really needed to develop very innovative and different solutions in order to bring about economic development and sustainable economic situations for people living there. Now, I will refer to these projects and these examples as I go about presenting a little bit the DCM to you. And I would say we are also getting to that part now. I'm going to present to you very briefly the Dialogic Change Model, which we also call the DCM. And here you can see it in its entirety. Now, the Dialogic Change Model, or DCM, is first and foremost is what we call a process methodology, which means it helps you to design and to implement and to realize, together with stakeholders, sustainable solutions, and design your process also of bringing people around one table and keeping them there, and to work with them collectively to develop solutions to the challenges that you have. So I want to give you a very brief example from how this process design might look like. This is from the project in Egypt, which is about supporting education and improving the quality of education in Egypt. And you can see that this is really a process design done with the DCM for this particular project. And it shows you the engagement process with a huge diversity of stakeholders that needed to be brought around one table. This is roughly what happens in the left-hand side of the image. And then who come together and who agree on certain formal activities and who come to a memorandum of understanding to what activities are necessary in order to enhance the dual education system in Egypt. Now, this is really one of the examples how it might look like when you apply the DCM to give you some structure about how do I go about if I want to improve, in this instance, quality education in Egypt. How do I go about, with whom do I have to talk, how do I engage them, and how can I bring people to work together? Now, the DCM is, as you can see, it has 4 phases. We call them, first one is exploring and engaging. This is where you build trust. That's the essential part for any collaboration. You build trust with all the stakeholders that you need. You explore the context with them. How do they understand the problem? What kind of solution do they see? And you engage them and essentially get them around the common challenge and get them motivated to work together. In phase 2, you get to the formal agreements. It's building and formalizing. This is where, based on the trust that you have established, you can agree on particular actions, very specific goals, very specific process steps that you might need in order to achieve your goals. You can then go into phase 3, where you implement and evaluate. This is where things get very concretely, tangibly done on the ground. This is where you achieve your first concrete results, where you celebrate your successes and where you also monitor if everything is going well. And finally, the 4th phase is where you develop your project further. You can either just continue doing what you're doing if everything is going well. You can do it in a different region, in a different province, or you can actually formalize it more and maybe make a proper institution essentially out of it. Now, what I want to highlight about the DCM is actually that you should think about it not in a linear way, but in a 3-dimensional way. And this is what you see here. This spiral design from the DCM is not done by chance, it's done very deliberately, because it means that all the phases that you have in the DCM, they build upon each other, which means no phase is ever completely done. You just add a different phase. It's like building a tower. So when you go into exploring and engaging, the phase where you build trust, you must never cease with the activities that you need to do in order to build and to keep also the trust with the stakeholders and to keep the relationships that you build in the first phase. It's only when particular phases, the collaboration in the phases are strong enough, this is when you can add another layer and move to another phase. So these phases from the DCM, they build upon each other and develop really in a 3-dimensional way. So this is one of the main characteristics that you need to remember. It's not, collaboration is never a linear way. It's a three-dimensional way, and it's always continuing. You can never stop certain activities that are essential. And you can see from this design that the first phase, since it's really the starting phase, is probably one of the most important phases, because this is the foundation of your collaboration. This is where you start. So the first phase, exploring and engaging. There are three really important principles you need to remember for this first phase. It's about building trust and building relationships, which means you need to define which stakeholders do I need for this collaboration. Who are the key decision makers? Who are the people that I need to implement the change that I want to see? Most importantly, who are the people who are going to benefit from this? This is a stakeholder group often overlooked. I would say, for example, in the situation in Egypt, the beneficiaries are the students and the pupils. They are a hugely important stakeholder group that needs to be taken into account from the start. You get to meet them, you build relationships with the concrete people representing these stakeholders. You explore with them, how do they see the challenge? Where do they think does the problem originate from? What kind of potential solutions are there? You get to know them, and you get to have an image of the context that is around you, the different perspectives and positions that people have. You also do what we call get the system into conversation with itself. So it's not only you who has to talk to all the stakeholders, but also the stakeholders among each other need to talk. They need to get into a dialogue. They need to understand each other's perspective. They need to develop this resonance for each other, where they're standing from, but also the resonance for working together. The only solution forward is working together, even if my neighbor or the person in the different institution thinks completely different about what should be done. Finally, third important part is building a strong container. What we mean with the term of container is a group, and mostly an informal group of people who are motivated and engaged, who are really very closely behind the goal, and who are also representatives from all your key stakeholders. This is essentially the core group, the drivers of the process, and also the people who will help you with the entire work of engaging the broader system of stakeholders. Now, a very short illustration about the principles of this first phase, exploring and engaging. This is a graphic that has been developed in the Tunisia project. So this was about establishing a dialogue forum for integrated water resource management. And you see on the right-hand side, the representatives from the absolute key stakeholders, which were, on the one hand, the Ministry of Agriculture on the national level, the regional level, and the local level, and also what we will call the beneficiaries, in this case, important stakeholders, namely farmers in this region. They were the main water users. They were affected from this project and needed to be in there to co-create the solution. And you see how the process moving from the right-hand side to the left-hand side, people got to talk among each other. First, the stakeholder groups, namely the ministry and the water users separately, and then they, step by step, came together in more mixed meetings and mixed workshops, and could explore the context and come to a sort of common understanding about what could be done, what should be done together. And then you see all the way to the left-hand side, this is where you had the container of people with representatives from all stakeholders together, who could then drive this process for a water dialogue forum. So once you've invested enough time into building the relationships and establishing the trust that is necessary for collaboration in the first phase, you can then add the second layer and the second pattern of collaboration, namely phase 2, building and formalizing. And only then you can move into what is also very pressing to us and what we all want to achieve, formal agreements. So first of all, for the second phase, you find the common ground together with your stakeholders. You explore their perspective. Now it's time to come to agree on a common understanding. This is how we see the problem. This is how we see a potential solution. And this is how we think we can achieve this solution. So you define a common ground. You define a common goal. Where do you want to go? What vision do you see in the future once this project is successfully implemented? And you plan the future together, which means you really sit down and you say who contributes what kind of structure do we potentially need, a project secretariat or expert groups or task forces, or do we maybe need external funding? All these kind of very formal agreements. This is what happens in phase 2. Anything that is necessary in order to then go about and collaboratively implement, do activities together. Now, although the second phase is something where a lot of formalization happens, I want to give you an example from Morocco about finding the common ground. We supported this project that was engaged in promoting economic development in Morocco in really some of their most central regions. So where there really weren't that many opportunities, not that much infrastructure, not so much diverse nature, so not so many opportunities like on the coastline. And this was in Midelt. Now we had stakeholders from this project, and these were public administration and business leaders, and also representatives from the civil society, come together in one of our trainings where we really do casework, but also talk a bit and apply our model and our methodology. And these stakeholders, they actually came together and they drew a vision of how they want to see economic change in Midelt in 2027. So especially for a goal such as economic development, which can in itself seem abstract, it's hugely beneficial to visualize this actually together with the stakeholders. What kind of change, what kind of different future do you want to work towards? How does it concretely look like? Now, when we're zooming into this a little bit more, you can see that the stakeholders very concretely developed their vision of change. Namely, in Midelt, they wanted to see solar energy, wind energy. They wanted to see a derived biosphere in the mountains, including sustainable tourism, winter tourism, which used to happen in Midelt and doesn't anymore. They also had very specific ideas about cooperatives for agriculture, also agriculture and farms whose energy needs were supplied by the solar energy that was generated in the province itself. There were also, if you look more into the details, a lot of infrastructure ideas. There was an airport, there was an industrial zone, there were health centers, sustainable tourism, sustainable hotels, there were training centers, there was also sustainable water management. So you really see how they had very specific ideas how sustainable economic development, so the social, ecological, and the economic pillar of sustainability work together in the province in the future in order to bring about a different opportunity and different future for this province. And especially when you are in phase 2, when it's about the nitty-gritty of negotiations and working to find agreements, such an emotionally compelling goal can be enormously important to keep people engaged, to keep people together. Now, once you've done all your formal agreements and you're ready to go, you go. You start implementing everything that you planned. And once you've implemented some of the activities, you can also start what is always so hugely important, the monitoring and evaluation. we like to call it more as a learning mechanism, simply to highlight also, let's say, highlight more the positive ideas and the positive potential that lies behind reflecting about what you have done, what can you learn from it, what is going really well, and how can we use that moving ahead. Now, phase 3, the important principles are transparency and communication. Now, of course, transparency and communication are also important in the phases beforehand. We have it here in the phase 3 in particular because once you start implementing your plans, it's especially important to keep everyone updated about how the progress is going on, how the project is developing, but also because this is the part where, since you are doing something very tangible and concrete on the ground, this is also the part where you can bring in the media. So it's about communication to the wider stakeholder system, which includes the wider public and hence a lot of media outlets. The phase where you realize things in this case, it's also you're doing something, you have results. Once you have them, celebrate them, celebrate the results that you have. You can't do anything better than with the first achievements, the first fruits of all your hard labor that you did, than to sit down with all your stakeholders and celebrate about it. Because it's been hard work up until now, and it has an incredible potential just to celebrate everything that you've done for keeping people again engaged and to give some sort of new air and new breathing into everything that you're doing. And like I said, it's the time to review also if everything is going well, not beforehand. It's about establishing collective learning mechanisms. Sit together periodically and see how everything is going. And I have here an example from one of the last examples I'm going to bring very specifically here. This is about the project to make the cocoa value chain in Côte d'Ivoire more sustainable. The reason I'm bringing this in here is that it's a completely different process than what you've seen in Egypt, but this is also a process design done with the Dialogic Change Model. And the project on sustainable cocoa in Côte d'Ivoire was also progressed very far already into phase 3, but was lacking enormously a learning mechanism. There were a lot of activities going on, some of them really fantastic, some of them not so impactful, let's say it. But there was no communication between all the different stakeholders and all their different activities that they were already doing. So what this process here shows, this graphic, is on the left-hand side, you see all the stakeholders, that, let's say, the key stakeholders that are engaged in Côte d'Ivoire from the entire global value chain of cocoa production. And there are activities from the phase 1, so engaging and exploring the context with the stakeholders, towards formalizing particular agreements, towards moving all the way to the right, to the integrated learning system, to really reflect together about what's going well and what's not going so well. So this is a design that shows structured engagement and structured way of bringing together a huge diversity of stakeholders to have a very productive reflection about what is everyone doing and how can we actually mutually support each other and how can we learn from each other. And finally, you have the phase 4. And phase 4 can take different forms. It depends on your project, it depends on your collaboration. You can have, if you have a project that is going really well and you just want to continue what you're doing, then you continue. Sometimes you also have a project that you maybe designed sort of as a little pilot, as a little test somewhere. This is, for example, something that happened in Morocco. This collaboration between stakeholders was tested in particular provinces, and then people said, well, if this is going great, then we want to do this in other provinces as well. You can also have the situation of saying, everything is going fantastic. We just want to make it bigger. We don't want to do it in a different place, but we want to do it overall much bigger. So this was the idea, for example, in Côte d'Ivoire, where the thought was, if the efforts to make the value chain in Côte d'Ivoire on cocoa more sustainable, if this is going well, then we're going to expand this to all the major cocoa producing countries in the rest of the world as well, and keep it going in Côte d'Ivoire, obviously. You can also institutionalize it, which simply means if your project is going great and you want to give it an even more formal structure because you tested it well, then this is the time to do it. So phase 4 is, for example, about building a next level container. This is if you move somewhere else or if you make it bigger. Obviously, the system or the landscape of your stakeholder also changes. You need to take into account more people, more institutions. So you need to think about, again, in a different way, who are your key stakeholders for this slightly different form of collaboration. Sometimes you also need to create management structures. So again, if you want to formalize it, if you want to make a real institution about it, I know like a lot of international organizations came out of little pilot tests that eventually formalized into a more concrete organization. Then obviously you need to create management structures, different management structures than what you had beforehand. And finally, it's always, if you continue what you do, whether in its original form or in a slightly different form, always keep the learning systems. Because any collaboration can only work if you continue what you do, but also keep an eye about what is going well, what is not so going well, and if you keep the flexibility also to adapt your planning to what you learn. So once you're here in phase 4, this is again where the spiral character of the DCM comes out. Because once you've arrived here, and maybe you've seen it already in the principles that I just mentioned about phase 4, once you're here, you essentially start with the first phase again. Whether you continue the project in a different province or you formalize it. If you need to build a different group of stakeholders, core stakeholders together in a container, you go back to exploring the context with them. What is the problem? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? Where is resonance for dialogue? Where is resonance for change? What kind of strategies do I need to develop to get everyone that I need around this table to move things along? Now that's been the very brief introduction into the Dialogic Change Model. As I said at the start, I used 4 particular examples where this model has been applied in concrete cases, 3 of which have been pulled from the MENA region as well. Now you see here, I just gave you a very brief overview over all the different projects where we also work with the DCM. And I'd also just like to highlight that the DCM has not only been applied in all these situations, but also comes really from collaboration experience. It's a methodology and it's an approach that is very much developed from practical experience from over 25 years in collaboration situations. And if you look at, let's say, just the regional profile of where the DCM has all been applied already, you see we've been engaged in a lot of situations where water management was at the forefront. It's a classic common good problem that really, really needs collaboration. That was in a regional project, but we also had a project very specifically in Jordan about this, in Tunisia and in Palestine. We're also working specifically in Tunisia, completely different sector, with a really great and very engaged local NGO for supporting urban development, essentially sustainable urban development in city development. And Morocco, again, this is the example of the economic development in the disadvantaged regions in the center, but we also supported the promotion of small and medium-sized enterprises. This has a very economic focus in Morocco. And in Egypt, apart from the education project, there is also a project we are engaged in that centers on renewable energies and energy efficiency. So you see, it's been applied over a variety of countries, even in that region, a variety of sectors. But collaboration is what is needed everywhere. And the DCM provides the flexibility really to adapt to any particular context that you might need. Now, this has been the very brief introduction to the DCM, sort of the cornerstone of what you need to think about to have sustainable collaboration. Now, like I mentioned in the beginning very briefly, it's really our mission to bring this approach out into the world. We want to empower people with this methodology so that they can lead, that you can lead collaboration for what is necessary. And I just want to highlight that we do open courses in the Dialogic Change Model, where you can actually bring your cases, your project situation, your collaboration challenge that you might have, and you learn really all the depths and all the details and tools that are integrated in the Dialogic Change Model and apply directly to your cases. And we have, in particular for the MENA region, for the first time this year, we offer an open course in the region, this time in Amman, in Jordan. It's from 3rd to 6th of September this year. And yeah, this is the first time we're offering this. But of course, we also have our standard open courses that always happen in Potsdam here in Germany, and also in Cape Town at our other location, office location in South Africa. So I would say that's that from my side. I know I talked quite a bit now, but this is really the part where the interactive session starts, and I'm really looking forward to hear all your questions, or your comments, or your insights that you might have. And for that, I'm going to bring in my colleague Martin again, so that he can help me and tell me what all the questions have been asked already. So let's see. Yes.
Hi. Okay, so yeah, we have quite an engaged group, I think. Somebody seems to know each other and so on. And we also have 2 questions already. Of course, the others, feel free to type in your questions now. But I would like to start with Ida, who raised the question, which has to do a little bit with reporting of stakeholder dialogues. So she wants to know whether we have some guidelines about how to report results of stakeholder meetings in a way that it is scientifically valuable. So this is a question. I'm not sure either you are in a scientific field. I think that is important to know for us as well. But maybe you can start already answering this question, Elisabeth.
Yeah, sure. I would say we have, of course, reporting the results of stakeholder collaboration is enormously important. I would say it depends a bit on where you would situate yourself with your collaboration. If you are in the first and the second phase, this is still the part where trust is enormously important. So, of course, you need to distribute and disseminate the results of what is going on sort of very quickly and very clearly as soon as possible. But within the group of stakeholders that is developing the collaboration at this moment, I'd say within the initial container. In particular, with your question about scientifically proven way, I would say not the format in and of itself. I would say if you're doing the collaboration, test one particular format that you think is enormously important, and then try to get as much feedback from the stakeholders as possible. So invite openly people to say, is this the information that you need? Is there any information missing? Do you think everyone who needs to hear this has heard about it, or does someone else need to be included in the, let's say, in the mailing list? Something like this.
Okay. I hope this answers your question. Elizabeth, may I ask you, please mute when I am talking, because the quality of my audio is not as good.
Okay, sure, sorry.
So I hope it's better now. Okay, thanks, Ida, for this question. We have a second one from Monica. And she has a question on phase 1 of the DCM. It is, if after all the efforts, stakeholders do not find a common language, what tools to use in order to proceed? Elisabeth.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm afraid I was a bit distracted in trying to solve this issue with a microphone. So if I understood it correctly, it's about if you have troubles finding the common language, what can you do in order to find that common ground? Is that right?
And which tools do you use?
Which tools? Okay. I would say is this also is a question that needs to be resolved really indeed by the stakeholders themselves. It's a question that goes back to phase 1. I would say a clear tool is actually to talk to the diversity of stakeholders, that where you feel the language is different, talk to them in separate, let's say, language groups, and try to explore where the difficulties of finding a common language are. So get their perspective about what is necessary, like where the traps really are, where the difficulties are of finding a common language. And then really, I'd say, give the task to them to find a common language. Now, this is also one of the issues that we had, for example, in the project in Tunisia, establishing collaboration for sustainable water management. Because the stakeholders that we had together were different sociocultural groups, and even had like very particular dialect issues that were tied to very clear social identities. And this was enormously important to sort of navigate the power differences that you had between the stakeholders. And we solved this issue by really taking a lot of time of talking separately with all the stakeholder groups, and then also raising very openly exactly this issue about how should things be communicated. And the communication in the end, or the common language that people agreed upon, was really a very graphic illustration. That was one part. And also to have really one, we had one local consultant essentially who would also write down things in that very particular local dialect, and not, let's say, in the high standard Arabic that some people used in the capital. And this was the common ground that the stakeholders developed together. Okay.
I hope that answers your question, Monica. We have another question coming from Carmen, and she would like to know if you could give her or all of us some examples of learning systems.
Okay, yeah, sure. Learning systems can be something, let's say, as simple as regular meetings that are really just dedicated into reviewing the collaboration that is ongoing, and then see what is going well, what is not going so well. Now, of course, if you have, let's say, a project or collaboration that is not so complex on a local level, that's done very, very easily. Let's say it like this. If you have a more complex project, maybe something that is regional or that involves really a huge group of stakeholders, I'd say also it's planning regular face-to-face meetings. It's exploring any sort of communication techniques that might work, whether it's a regular Facebook group, whether it's a WhatsApp group, whether it's Skype conference calls, anything like this. You can also have regular workshops where people come together, where stakeholders send sort of their designated representatives and say, listen, rework the current plan that is ongoing. We also have, I think what comes to my mind is, we have actually as part of the Dialogic Change Model, we have also developed what we call a process monitoring tool, which gives you 6 success factors for effective multi-stakeholder collaboration that you can take and then define what they mean in your specific context. There are things such as leadership, inclusivity, ownership, technical expertise, and they're very detailed, but like DCM, they need to be adapted very specifically to your context. So you can take, for example, this inspiration from the success factors and say, with my core group of stakeholders, I would say maybe 6 to 9 people, I'm going to meet every 3 months or every 6 months, and we're going to look at what these success factors mean to us and how they are currently present in our collaboration. How is it going well or not going so well? I hope that gives you a little bit of an inspiration about this.
So I would like to ask the group if there are any more questions, because I have none on my list. So yeah, thanks Carmen for this last question. So do we have any questions more? We would have some time left, but if Elisabeth's talk was so good that she answered all your questions already, we can stop the webinar also now. Just tell us if you have still some questions. Okay, so I think for the moment we are done.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I would say if this is it, then thank you very much for listening, and thank you also for your questions. Like Martin already said, I hope I gave you a bit of an inspiration and some answers to your reflections about it. I would say, as you see, you have Albert Einstein here. Collaboration in a lot of times is a question of changing our thinking about the world and coming back to some principles that we essentially all know about, like building trust and building good relationships with people and see people as people. And it's knowledge that we all of us have. It's more a question about how to integrate this in our day-to-day business, which is regulated by project management and indicators and time pressure. But there's a way, and I hope you find this inspiring. I hope you found it interesting. If you have any more questions or reflections, anything that is left, anything that comes in the day after this, I'd say really please don't hesitate to contact us. We are on social media. We have Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And then, of course, you can also contact us directly. Here's the contact details directly in the presentation, and I would love to hear from you. So I would say that's that from our side. So thank you very much again, and maybe see you sometime around in the world of the sustainable development. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.